Richmond requests that a destitute black woman attend a wedding. However, upon their arrival, the room becomes mute. The invitation in Austin's hand was met with a vacant gaze. He traced the exquisite gold-embossed letters with his fingertips, but the message continued to appear surreal. Laura, his former fiancée, was married, and she was not only getting married, but she was also organizing the most extravagant event of the year at one of the most opulent venues in Paris. A year ago, she withdrew from his life, no longer interested in waiting for him to prioritize their relationship over his career. She was now engaged to a man who, by all accounts, had time for her. Austin flung the invitation on his polished glass table and then sank into the plush leather sofa in his penthouse, which boasted a view of the Champs-Élysées. His heart was burdened by a combination of regret and something much more sinister. Since Laura's departure, he had not communicated with her, and the prospect of attending her nuptials, particularly alone, was intolerable. Austin poured himself a glass of whiskey as the radiance from the Eiffel Tower flickered through his window as the evening drew on. He contemplated declining the invitation. However, a part of him was adamant about not taking the simple route. He would travel, but not alone. On the following day, Austin was wandering aimlessly through the streets, navigating through the throngs, when he spotted her, a woman who was seated on the steps of a small cafe, her head bowed low, shielding herself from the bustling world. She donned a soiled parka that appeared to have endured an excessive number of winters. Her hair was untamed and unkempt, and her shoes were tattered. However, there was something about her that caused Austin to halt in his tracks. She emanated a quiet fortitude, despite the fact that her situation was manifest, and her countenance was gentle. Austin experienced an internal disturbance. "Hello," he said awkwardly, standing a few feet away. The woman's dark eyes met his slowly as she glanced up. "Hello," she replied quietly, her voice scarcely audible amidst the street commotion. "My name is Austin." Her gaze remained fixed on him for a brief period, as if she were attempting to determine whether he was a friend or adversary. She finally responded, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Celeste," she said. Austin hesitated. He was unaware of the reason for his halt. It is possible that the wedding was the cause, or that the loneliness that had lodged in his bones was the cause. Regardless of the cause, he found himself seated beside her on the frigid steps. Austin attempted to maintain a casual demeanor as he inquired, "Do you mind if I inquire as to what brought you here?" Celeste shook her head. "I suppose life is a series of unfortunate events that led me to this location." Austin nodded, uncertain about how to respond. He was not accustomed to engaging in genuine conversations with strangers, let alone those who had gone through such adversity. However, the calm resilience of her speech captivated him. Austin began, "Look, this is going to sound insane," as he rubbed his temples in an attempt to assemble his own words. "But would you be willing to attend a wedding with me?" Celeste's expression was a mixture of suspicion and bewilderment as she blinked. "Are you being sincere?" "I will ensure that you have appropriate attire. It is my ex's wedding, and I am genuinely apprehensive about attending alone." Celeste was silent for a brief period. She fixed her gaze on him, examining his features for any indications of derision. She let out a gentle chuckle when she was unable to locate any. "I am unable to determine whether this is the most peculiar or the most benevolent event that has occurred to me." "It is possible that it is a combination," Austin stated, with a modest smile. "However, I am sincere. I invite you to join me." Celeste's uncertainty had persisted for an additional moment before she finally assent. "That sounds reasonable. Why not?" Austin took her to a boutique the following day, a high-end establishment where the sales staff evaluated individuals based on their appearance upon entering. Their disdainful views were immediately attracted to Celeste, who was attired in her worn clothing. Austin observed it, and for a brief moment he harbored remorse for having brought her here. However, he then attracted Celeste's attention. She entered with her head held high, unaffected by the sideways views, and she was not humiliated or cowering. She exuded a sense of royalty that was unyielding. The staff eventually warmed up to Austin, recognizing that he was not a man to be trifled with, and offered Celeste a variety of gowns. Austin remained in the background, imbibing on a glass of water that the boutique had provided as a gesture of goodwill, as she retreated behind the curtain to try them on. Celeste appeared from the dressing room after an apparent number of hours. She donned a flowing emerald gown that accentuated her figure in all the appropriate areas. The makeup artist had discreetly enhanced her natural attractiveness, and her dark hair had been drawn back into an elegant style. She did not merely appear transformed, she appeared formidable. Celeste stood there, her eyes open as she examined herself in the mirror. She murmured, "Is that truly me?" Austin grinned. "Indeed, it is you." The boutique staff, who were now fully invested in her transformation, applauded, but Celeste's gaze was fixed on her reflection, and Austin witnessed for the first time the woman she had been before life had struck her down. She gently expressed her gratitude to Austin before turning to him. His heart was filled with emotion as a result of the sincerity in her voice. "You deserve this," he responded. On the day of the wedding, Austin arrived at the magnificent venue with Celeste by his side, and he was overcome with a peculiar combination of anxiety and anticipation. The location was an expansive chateau in the French countryside, the type of establishment where the affluent congregated to commemorate the most significant events of their lives. Heads turned, conversations halted, and the room appeared to hold its breath as they entered the main hall. Celeste now walked beside Austin with a grace that belied her circumstances, emanating confidence in her breathtaking gown. Austin observed Laura at the opposite end of the room. She greeted visitors with a broad, polished smile, while standing with her new spouse. However, her demeanor deteriorated when she fixed her gaze on Austin and Celeste. A brief moment of astonishment was followed by a much darker emotion that appeared to be regret. "Austin," Laura addressed him when they eventually approached, her voice remaining composed and composed. Celeste was the object of her gaze. "And this is—" Her name was Celeste, and Austin greeted her with a broad smile. "My date." Laura extended her hand, but her smile did not quite reach her eyes. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Celeste. You are quite attractive." "Thank you," Celeste replied, her voice remaining steady and warm. "The wedding is exquisite." Austin could sense the weight of the gaze as they made their way through the room, and the tension between them was palpable. Celeste was the subject of some curious observations, as some guests murmured behind their hands. However, she maintained her composure. She maintained a high profile, her shoulders erect, as if she were the most suited to the situation. The night progressed, and Austin found himself conversing with Celeste more frequently than with any other individual. He came to the realization that he had significantly underestimated her as they shared stories and chuckled. She was not merely an individual he had brought along to make a statement. She was an individual who had endured adversities that were beyond the comprehension of the majority of individuals. Despite this, she was unwaveringly honest, kind, and strong. Laura eventually located him in close proximity to the garden, where he was not surrounded by the throng. "Austin, would you like to engage in conversation?" He followed her to a secluded corner, nodding in agreement. Laura began, her voice subdued. "I didn't anticipate that you would bring someone of her caliber. You are aware of the potential behavior of these individuals." Austin shook his head. "What is the intended meaning of that?" Laura stated with precision, "She is not from our world. I simply do not wish for you to sustain any injuries, that is all." Austin experienced a sudden surge of rage in his chest. "Are you in pain? Are you concerned about me? Laura, this is not about me, it is about your embarrassment." Laura's irises widened in astonishment, but she did not deny it. Celeste appeared before either of them could proceed, her eyes vigilant but her visage placid. She uttered a gentle, "Excuse me." I did not intend to interrupt. However, I was unable to avoid overhearing. Laura's body tensed. Celeste continued, her voice unwavering. "I am aware that I am not what you anticipated. However, Austin extended an invitation to me because he recognizes me for who I am. I am more than my circumstances." Suddenly, there was a moment of silence. Subsequently, an alteration occurred in the atmosphere. Laura was at a loss for words, despite her composure. She abruptly excused herself, muttering something about the necessity of greeting additional guests. Austin's heart was filled with admiration as he turned to Celeste. "You were not obligated to do that." Celeste's smile was genuine this time. "I did it for myself, not just for you." As the evening progressed, Austin and Celeste discovered themselves on the dance floor. Austin felt a novel sensation as the orchestra played a slow, melodic melody, and they moved in unison. This was no longer solely about inciting Laura's envy. This was not even about the wedding. Celeste was the subject. He came to the realization that he cared about her as they swayed to the music. He could not fathom a life without her, despite the fact that she had entered his life unexpectedly. Austin gazed into her eyes after the music concluded. "Celeste, I do not wish for tonight to serve as the conclusion." Celeste's expression softened as she scanned his face. "What do you mean?" "In other words, I am interested in providing you with assistance, encouragement, and the opportunity to observe the course of this." Celeste did not respond for a brief period. This was followed by a slight smile that pulled at the corners of her mouth. "I would appreciate that." They departed the nuptials in unison, disappearing into the chilly night. The party's cacophony dissipated, yielding to the tranquility of the evening. Austin experienced a tranquility that had not been experienced in years as they strolled down the cobblestone streets together. He had lost interest in the opinions of others. This moment with Celeste was all that mattered. As they embarked on their future together, Austin was confident that they would confront any obstacles that arose. The streamlined, modern furniture that adorned Austin's apartment was illuminated by the chilly morning light that streamed through the window. Everything in this location was a testament to his success. The minimalist art on the walls, the polished steel, and the glass surfaces. However, today, it all seemed somewhat false. He was discreetly brewing coffee at the kitchen counter, his mind preoccupied with the events of the previous night, including the wedding, the glimpses, and Celeste's unwavering support and unflinching demeanor in the face of the judgment of his old world. He had escorted her away from the chaos and returned to his residence, where they had conversed for hours and exchanged stories until they were beset by slumber. Now the apartment was devoid of noise. Celeste was still asleep in the guest room. Austin peered over his shoulder at the closed door, experiencing a moment of apprehension. Would she remain, or would she depart this morning, returning to the world from which she originated? He was absorbed in thought as he drank his coffee when he heard the gentle clack of a door opening. Celeste was standing in the doorway of the guest room when he turned, and she was there. She had changed into a pair of his sweatpants and an old t-shirt, and her hair was still slightly disheveled from sleeping. Nevertheless, she appeared more at ease than she had at the ceremony, and she appeared more like herself. "Morning," she said, her voice raspy from slumber. "Morning," Austin replied, beaming as he placed his cup down. "Coffee?" Celeste nodded as she walked slowly toward the kitchen island, where he was seated. She was reserved, but not in an unpleasant manner. Her movements were free of tension and hesitation. She appeared at ease, and Austin's shoulders relaxed as he observed her. She accepted the cup with gratitude after he poured it for her. Their gaze momentarily intersected as she sipped. Austin felt the weight of the events that had transpired between them in the past few days, which were unexpected and unfamiliar to him. He had been aware of his attraction to her from the outset. However, it now appeared to be more than that. Laura was no longer the focus. It was not a matter of appearances. It was about Celeste and the manner in which she navigated the world with a calm strength and resilience. "I should probably get going," Celeste responded, interrupting the silence. Austin's heart marginally sank as he blinked. "You are not required to remain. However, you are welcome to do so." Celeste smiled, although it did not quite reach her eyes. "I am grateful for your assistance. However, I must resolve certain matters." Austin concurred, despite his desire to extend her stay in order to explore the potential of this connection. However, he was aware that it was unwise to exert pressure. Celeste was not a person who could be easily restrained. Although it was not characterized by luxury and ease, she led an existence of her own. He muttered, "I comprehend. However, I am committed to providing you with the assistance you require. I am committed to being there for you." Celeste gazed at him for an extended period, her expression rendering it impossible to interpret. She then reclined against the counter and set her coffee down with a slight exhale. "Austin, I am truly grateful for all that you have done for me. However, I am not interested in becoming your project. I am not seeking a handout or a fairy tale in which a wealthy individual rescues an impoverished girl from the streets." Austin was aware that she was correct, despite the fact that her words were painful. "No, Celeste. I am not attempting to rescue you. Rather, I am interested in gaining a deeper understanding of you and observing the course of this." There was a subtle softening of Celeste's irises. "And I share your sentiment. However, I must proceed cautiously. My life is intricate. I have encountered numerous challenges and am still in the process of establishing my own identity. I am unable to depend on others to resolve all of my issues." Austin's comprehension was more profound than he would have liked to acknowledge, as evidenced by his nodding. He had consistently been the individual who resolved issues. Celeste's existence was not something he could purchase his way into, despite the fact that money and power could typically resolve the majority of issues in his world. She required additional accommodation. Time. "All right," he replied. "Please take as much time as you require. However, I am available if you require my assistance." Celeste smiled once more, but this time it was more sincere. "Thank you." Celeste disintegrated into the cadence of her existence over the course of several weeks. She returned to the streets, the shelters she frequented, the people she knew, and the harsh realities she encountered on a daily basis. However, she was not the same individual as she had been previously. The wedding night, as Austin had perceived her, had imbued her with a newfound fortitude. A portion of her remained cautious and uncertain, but another part of her began to suspect that she may have been deserving of more than what life had to offer. She often reflected on Austin, recalling the silent moments they had shared after the wedding and the way he had gazed at her as if she were significant. It was peculiar to be perceived in that manner after experiencing such a prolonged period of invisibility. However, Celeste was aware that it was unwise to become engrossed in those thoughts. She was compelled to prioritize her own well-being in order to re-establish her life on her own terms. Consequently, she dedicated herself to securing employment, securing housing, and working her way out of the ditch that life had created for her. Then one day, everything changed. A woman approached her as she sat at her customary location outside the cafe. Celeste initially did not give much heed. She was accustomed to individuals passing by, occasionally flinging her a few coins, and at other times refraining from making eye contact. However, this woman halted in front of her, her pointed features accentuated by an oversized sunglasses and an expensive-looking parka. The woman's voice was calm and measured as she inquired, "Celeste?" Against the sunlight, Celeste glanced up, blinking. "I?" The woman smiled, although it did not quite extend to her eyes. "My name is Laura. We encountered each other at the wedding." Celeste's heart raced irregularly. She had never anticipated encountering Laura again, and certainly not in this manner. "Oh, yeah, I remember," Celeste replied with caution. "The question is, what are you doing here?" Laura crossed her legs in an elegant manner as she seated down on the settee next to her. "I desired to converse with you." Celeste experienced a sensation of disquiet that enveloped her. What could Laura possibly desire? Laura began by saying, "Look," with a quiet voice, "I am aware that this may seem unusual, but I require your absence from Austin." Celeste, blinking, her mind was in a state of disarray. "What?" Laura sighed and leaned back slightly. "You are not a part of his world, Celeste. You are aware of this. And to be honest, I do not believe you are beneficial to him. You are a source of distraction. Austin has had a lot on his plate since the wedding, and I do not believe you are contributing." Celeste's voice remained composed, despite the fact that she felt a surge of fury in her bosom. "I am not attempting to cause Austin harm. We are friends." Laura's expression was skeptical, and she raised an eyebrow. "Friends? Come on. Let's be honest here. You and I both know that's not going to work. He is from a world that you can't even begin to comprehend. And no offense, but you're not exactly his equal." Celeste struggled to maintain her composure as she clenched her fists. "I do not need to be his equal. Austin is an independent individual. He is free to choose whether or not to see me." Laura smiled, albeit with a frigid, calculating expression. "I am confident that it is. However, I am merely attempting to prevent you both from experiencing significant distress. You are not a suitable fit for his life, and he is not a suitable fit for yours. It would be preferable for you to withdraw from the situation before it becomes unmanageable." Celeste's pulse was thundering in her chest as she stood up. "I am uncertain as to the purpose of your actions, however they are unfeasible. I am devoted to Austin, and I will not abandon him solely because you believe I am inadequate for him." Laura's irises narrowed slightly, but she refrained from speaking for a brief period. She then too stood, adjusting her outerwear. "Choose your own attire, however. Do not claim that I did not warn you." Celeste stood there, her mind rushing, as Laura turned and strolled away. Later that evening, Austin sat in his office, gazing at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had been contemplating Celeste's well-being and wondered if she was doing well. He had not seen her since the morning following the wedding, despite the occasional text message they exchanged. She was more than he was willing to acknowledge that he missed. The desk beside him vibrated with the sound of his phone, causing him to exit his musings. He unexpectedly discovered a missive from Celeste when he took it up. It is imperative that we engage in conversation. Is it possible for me to visit? Austin's heart rose to his larynx. Was there an error? He promptly responded by inputting the following: "Certainly, please arrive at your convenience." A knock on the door occurred an hour later. Austin discovered Celeste standing there, appearing exhausted yet resolute. When he opened the door, he moved aside, allowing her to enter. He queried, closing the door behind her, "Is everything all right?" Celeste did not respond immediately. She entered the living room and briefly paced before turning to face him. She whispered, "Laura visited me today." Austin's midriff decreased. Celeste continued, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "What?" "She instructed me to remain away from you. She stated that I am not deserving of your affection and that I do not belong in your world." Austin experienced a sudden surge of rage in his chest. "What? That is absurd." Celeste shook her head. "Austin, she is correct. We are from entirely different worlds, and as much as I despise to acknowledge it, it is true. I am not meant to be here in this life." Austin advanced, his voice resolute. "Celeste, she is incorrect. You are entitled to be wherever you desire to be. I am not concerned with your background. Rather, I am concerned with your well-being." The expression of Celeste remained uncertain, despite the softening of her gaze. "However, what if it fails? What if she is correct and this is all a mere fantasy?" Austin tenderly clasped her hand. "Celeste, this is not a fantasy, it is a reality. I am confident that we can resolve this matter." They stood there in silence for an extended period, the weight of everything between them hanging in the air. Celeste finally affirmed, her voice scarcely rising above a whisper, "Certainly, let's give it a shot." Austin beamed, his chest filling with relief. "Excellent." Austin and Celeste began to navigate their new relationship in the weeks that followed, with each step drawing them closer together, but also requiring them to confront the stark contrasts between their worlds. Celeste encountered significant challenges in adapting to Austin's society of affluence and privilege. Having spent an extended period of time living on the streets, she struggled with the judgmental glances of his friends, the whispered comments about her heritage, and the assumptions that she was only with him for his money. However, Austin maintained his support for her, refusing to be influenced by the opinions of others. He observed the fortitude in her and the compassion that had initially captivated him. He was primarily concerned with the future they could create together rather than her past. The city lights twinkled in the distance as they sat together on the veranda of Austin's apartment one evening. Celeste reclined in her chair and sipped a goblet of wine while gazing at the horizon. "There are times when I am unable to comprehend that this is my life," she said quietly. "A few months ago, I was living on the streets, uncertain as to whether I would ever have a future. Now I am here with you." Austin reached over and gingerly grasped her hand. "You deserve this, Celeste. You deserve everything." Celeste smiled, but her irises betrayed a faint trace of melancholy. "I am currently uncertain as to whether I subscribe to that assertion. However, I am making an effort to do so." Austin's voice was gentle as he clasped her hand. "You are not required to accept it at this time. I will believe it for both of us until you do." However, the world began to press back just as they were beginning to find their footing. The judgment became more tangible as the murmurs intensified. Austin's acquaintances, whom he had known for years, began to withdraw from him as they were hesitant to incorporate Celeste into their social circle. Subtly querying his decisions, his colleagues raised their eyebrows. Even his family, who had consistently been supportive, expressed apprehension. His sibling had stated over drinks one evening, "You are making a mistake." "She is not like us, Austin. You are preparing yourself for disappointment." Austin had reacted with apprehension to the remark, but he was unable to dispel the conviction that, at the core, everyone believed Celeste was inadequate for him. Worse yet, he was concerned that Celeste might begin to share this sentiment. Celeste turned to him one evening as they lie in bed, her voice low in the darkness. "Austin, what if this fails? What if everyone else is correct?" Austin sat up, gazing downward at her. "They are incorrect, Celeste. They are not as familiar with you as I am." She responded, her voice brimming with emotion. "However, it is possible that they do not require to be acquainted with me. It is possible that this was destined to conclude in heartbreak." Her words caused Austin's heart to anguish, but he was determined to not allow her to surrender. "We are capable of achieving this. Our confidence must be based on our own abilities rather than the opinions of others." Celeste nodded, but the uncertainty persisted in her gaze. They persisted in their efforts to construct something tangible, despite the overwhelming odds that were piled against them as they fought against the world around them. Austin and Celeste persevered in confronting the obstacles that enveloped them as the days turned into weeks. However, it was evident that the path was anything but straightforward. It was as though each day was a challenge to their resilience, not only as individuals, but also as a couple. Celeste, despite her best efforts, was unable to disregard the subtle but cutting remarks, the murmurs and the glances from those in Austin's world. The comments would be presented as informal conversation, but the purpose was evident. At a dinner party, one of Austin's business associates said, "Isn't it refreshing how people from different walks of life can find each other?" His wife nodded in agreement. Another guest had laughed somewhat excessively at that. They added, "Indeed, it is reminiscent of a contemporary fairy tale. From poverty to wealth, correct?" Celeste had smiled graciously, but she had gripped her utensils slightly more tightly than was necessary. Austin had silently reassured her that they were in this together by squeezing her hand under the table. However, the disquiet that settled in her stomach every time she was reminded of how out of place she felt in his world was not erased by his support. Additionally, it was not solely strangers who exacerbated the situation. Despite their politeness, Austin's family never fully accepted her. The subtext was evident as his mother would ask leading questions about Celeste's future plans, her tone being slightly too saccharine. She would drink her wine and ask, "What are you contributing to the conversation? I am confident that you have aspirations. Nevertheless, it is imperative that you comprehend that our family has specific expectations." Celeste would smile and respond respectfully, but the conversations would leave her feeling depleted, as if she were perpetually striving to demonstrate her value. In the interim, Austin encountered his own challenges. The demands of his career were greater than ever, and the strain to preserve his reputation in the business world was in direct opposition to his aspiration to establish a life with Celeste. His colleagues, whom he had spent years establishing relationships with, were beginning to doubt his judgment. He could sense the change in their behavior, the skepticism, the subdued disapproval, although they did not express it explicitly. While Austin was in his office preparing for a critical meeting one afternoon, his elder sibling Andrew unexpectedly visited. Andrew inquired, closing the door without waiting for a response, "Do you have a moment?" Austin exhaled as he was already aware of the impending event. "What is it, Andrew?" Andrew did not spare words. "I understand that you are reluctant to hear this, but you are not doing yourself any favors by pursuing Celeste." Austin attempted to keep his temper in control by leaning back in his chair. What is the intended meaning of that? Andrew's tone was composed yet authoritative as he stated, "You comprehend my sentiment. By incorporating her into your life, you are endangering everything you have accomplished. The public is discussing it, and it is not a positive development." Austin's mandible contracted. "I am indifferent to the opinions of others." Andrew responded, "Perhaps you should. This is not about love or emotions, Austin. It is about your career and reputation. The world you are in, our world, is not tolerant of outsiders, particularly those like her." Austin's voice rose as he repeated, "Ones like her? What is the significance of that?" Andrew's hands were uplifted in a gesture of amity. "I am simply being realistic. Do you believe that I am unaware of the manner in which people treat her? It is not going to improve. You are engaged in a losing battle, and you will ultimately lose more than you anticipate. This is not solely about you. It is about the family and the business. You have worked too hard to allow it all to unravel over a single issue." Austin's voice was icy as he interjected, "Please refrain from concluding that sentence. Celeste is not a mere sum. She is the woman I cherish. If this offends you or anyone else, it is unfortunate." Andrew let out a sigh and shook his head. "You are being obstinate. Please reconsider your actions before it is too late." He then turned and exited the office, leaving Austin to contemplate the situation in silence. Austin's thoughts were perpetually drawn to his brother's words as he sat in his apartment sipping whiskey that evening. Despite his reluctance to acknowledge it, there was a part of him that was unable to disregard Andrew's apprehensions. It was his career and his family's legacy that were of significance. However, were they more significant than the existence he was endeavoring to establish with Celeste? Celeste entered the room, her expression betraying fatigue and apprehension. He was still engaged in contemplation. She had been volunteering her time at a local shelter to assist those in need, and although the work was fulfilling, it was emotionally draining. Austin stood to greet her, asking, "Have you had a difficult day?" Celeste nodded before removing her slippers and slumping onto the settee. "Indeed, you could make that argument. However, it is beneficial to experience a sense of purpose." Austin reclined beside her, draping an arm over her shoulders. The weight of the conversation he needed to have hung between them, but they sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Celeste finally broke the silence. "It appears that you are contemplating something. Could you elaborate?" Austin hesitated. He was hesitant to expose her to the uncertainties that had been gnawing at him, but he was unable to suppress them any longer. "It is my family," he said quietly. "They are concerned about us." Celeste's expression was imperceptible as she turned to gaze at him. "What is the nature of your concern?" Austin sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "They believe that I am making a mistake, that we are too dissimilar, and that the relationship will not be successful." Celeste was silent for a brief period, and her voice was composed but tinged with melancholy when she spoke. "Additionally, what are your thoughts?" Austin did not respond immediately. He was unable to articulate the internal conflict that was consuming him. "I believe they are unaware of the resources we possess. However, I am aware that this is a difficult situation for both of us. I am determined not to lose you, Celeste, but I am unsure of how to alleviate the situation." Celeste's irises were remote as she nodded slowly. "I was aware that this would be challenging. I was aware that I would never truly integrate into your society. However, I did not anticipate that it would be this challenging." She rose from her seat and proceeded to the window, where she gazed out at the city below. Occasionally, I question whether I am being selfish and preventing you from living the life you are meant to have." Austin's heart contracted. He loathed the fact that she was experiencing this emotion, that the world had caused her to question her own abilities. He approached her and gingerly swiveled her around to face him. He stated emphatically, "You are not impeding my progress. I am indifferent to the opinions of my family or colleagues. You are the most beneficial development that has occurred to me." Celeste's eyes were alight with unshed tears as she gazed upwards at him. "How long can you continue to resist them? How long before you begin to harbor animosity toward me?" Austin shook his head. "I will never harbor any animosity toward you. We will resolve this matter collaboratively." Celeste sighed and leaned into him. "I sincerely desire to believe that." Austin embraced her, ensuring that she was securely held. "Subsequently, have faith in us." However, the fractures in their relationship only continued to deepen, despite their desire to believe otherwise. The pressure from Austin's world was a significant burden on them both, and despite their efforts to disregard it, concerns persisted. Celeste gazed at him one evening as they reclined on the couch, her countenance betraying anguish. She spoke gently. "I have been contemplating. It is possible that we require additional space." Austin experienced a sensation of being devoid of breath. Celeste's voice was quivering as she inquired, "What do you mean?" "I am of the opinion that we are both experiencing difficulties, and it is possible that a period of separation will enable us to resolve them. I am apprehensive about losing you, but I also do not wish to continue to burden you." Austin's pulse beat rapidly, and he began to experience feelings of apprehension. "Celeste, you are not weighing me down. I am not interested in solitude. I desire to be in your company." Celeste's voice broke as she said, "But look at us. We are both engaged in battles from all angles. Perhaps it is time for us to take a step back, catch our breath, and determine whether this is truly what we desire." Austin refused to acknowledge the situation, shaking his head. "I do not require time. I am aware of my desires, and they are directed toward you." Celeste gazed at him with tears cascading down her face. "I adore you, Austin, but I must first establish my identity. I must be confident in my own right before I can join you." Austin's heart was devastated, but he was aware that she was correct. He was unable to deny that they were both struggling, despite his desire to combat it. And perhaps, just maybe, a period of separation would enable them to achieve the lucidity they required. "All right," he said quietly, his voice resonant with emotion. "I will provide it to you if that is what you require." Celeste wiped away her emotions as she nodded. "Thank you." Celeste departed Austin's residence the following morning after packing her belongings. Austin felt a vacancy settle in his chest as the door closed behind her, a vacuum that he was uncertain how to fill. He had previously believed that they could surmount any obstacle. However, he was now uncertain. He was only aware of his affection for her, and he could only hope that this was not the conclusion. Austin immersed himself in his work as the days passed, attempting to alleviate the agony of Celeste's absence. However, the aching in his chest persisted, regardless of how occupied he remained. He missed her, her mirth, her fortitude, and the way she perceived the world. He was uncertain as to whether or not he would ever regain her. Celeste experienced the separation as both a favor and a burden. She desired a space in which to rediscover herself and to reconstruct her life. However, without Austin's support, everything seemed more difficult. The shelters were chilly, and the streets were more desolate. She yearned for the comfort of his company, the manner in which he reassured her that she was sufficient. However, she was aware that she had made the correct decision, despite the fact that she missed him. She was compelled to establish her independence in order to demonstrate to herself that she was capable of leading a life that transcended mere survival. Consequently, she exerted herself to the fullest, securing menial employment and amassing sufficient funds to lease a modest, small apartment. Although it was insignificant, it was hers, and represented a significant stride toward the independence she desired. Despite the fact that the anguish of their separation never entirely dissipated, Austin and Celeste both developed in their own unique ways as the weeks turned into months. Austin acquired the ability to resist his family's influence, refusing to allow their opinions to influence his decisions. He came to the realization that the only existence he desired was one in which he could be authentic to himself and the people he loved. Celeste, for the first time in years, began to have faith in her own capabilities. She was no longer merely surviving, she was thriving. She was gradually but steadily constructing something. Her self-assurance increased with each stride she took, yet the bond between them persisted, even as they pursued their own individual paths. They continued to harbor feelings of affection and longing for one another. In the quiet moments when the world seemed too much to endure, they both questioned whether they had made the correct choice. Austin discovered himself standing outside Celeste's residence on a rainy evening. He had driven there without giving it much thought, and as he stood in the pouring rain, his pulse was pounding in his bosom. He had not seen her in months and had not spoken to her since the day she departed. However, he was unable to continue his absence. His heart was pounding as he knocked on the door. A few moments later, the door opened, and Celeste was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise. "Austin," she murmured, her voice scarcely discernible amid the rain. Austin's voice trembled as he approached. "I am unable to remain absent any longer, Celeste. I have always relied on you." Celeste's heart was thumping as she gazed at him. She had contemplated this moment on numerous occasions, and had envisioned the words she would utter if he were to return. But with his arrival, she was unable to do anything but experience the torrent of emotions that was coursing through her. She eventually murmured, "I have missed you," as tears streamed down her face. "I did not anticipate your return." Austin gingerly grasped her hand. "I never truly left, Celeste. You have been the sole thought on my mind since the day you exited that door. I am indifferent to the opinions of others and the world into which we are expected to fit. All I am concerned with is you and us." Celeste allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just maybe, they could make it work, as she felt the weight of his words for the first time in months. She advanced, embracing him with her arms. Austin held her close, confident that they would confront any obstacles that arose as the rain continued to fall. They were aware that their narrative was far from over as they stood in the rain, holding on to one another. Even though there would be additional conflicts to wage and misgivings to surmount, they were prepared. They had reconnected, and this time they would not allow the world to separate them. They would collaborate to construct something more substantial, something tangible, and regardless of the obstacles they encountered, they would confront them together, their pulses throbbing in unison.